exes reaching out, past flames, past potentialities resurfacing, uncomfortable conversations. Venus in Gemini has just gone direct, but she's not through with us yet. Let's talk about everything that's happened since April 3rd in your life, in our lives, as a collective and on the individual level. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new, I'm Leeor Alexandra. Welcome to the Baby Elephant community. On this channel, we talk about the law of attraction, spirituality, self-development, and so much more. And today we're going to talk about the goddess. So during this Venus retrograde, I have been heavily working with Venus, with the goddess. She has been making herself known to me and wanting to work with me since January, knocking on the doorway that is my mind, until I finally was like, okay, what am I supposed to do? And right when I was like, okay, what am I supposed to do? I realized, oh, Venus retrograde pre-shadow starting now. She wants me to create something to bring people back to her. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. For me, she came through in my dreams, in the books I was reading, in the shows I was watching, in conversations with people. Suddenly, this one star kept catching my eye since January, and it was her as the evening star. So bright, the brightest star in the sky. I had never noticed it before. I noticed her, I remember the first time I was actually at the Griffith Observatory, and I look up and I was like, oh my God, I feel like that's Venus. I don't know where it came from. And I pulled out my app that identifies stars in the sky, and sure enough, it was Venus. And then we go inside the Griffith Observatory, and there is this beautiful painting on the ceiling over there in the dome area. And my eye was drawn to this painting of this woman, and I was like, I feel like that's Venus. And mind you, I had never really looked into Venus before this, okay? I went to the description, and again, sure enough, it was Venus. And since then, she's been popping up in different ways. I'm sure that you've noticed it in your own life too, especially if you found yourself here on this video, or if you've done the Manifest with the Goddess workshop with me, you know that she pops up in all these really interesting, really cool ways. So Venus entered Gemini, the social, communicative, dualistic, and intellectual sign that's all about sharing information, on April 3rd. And her pre-shadow began on about April 9th and lasted until May 11th. She went retrograde on the 12th or the 13th, depending on where you are in the world. And she's just now gone direct on June 25th, which is today when I'm recording this. We are going to be in her post-shadow or her retro shade until July 29th. So there's still plenty of time to do work with the goddess. And realistically, you can work with her when she's out of her retrograde phase and further away from the earth as well. It's just this is an optimal time to create that connection. So the biggest central themes that I have noticed since April 3rd, from my perspective, have been the following. And that's 1, returning to Venus's temples. 2, reflection through receiving or giving up. And 3, communication, which we see on the micro level through our relationships and on the macro level through everything happening in the world right now, especially the protests and sharing of opinions and information on social media, also to do with the pandemic. And so let's start talking about the 3 themes. So first, returning to her temples. When we don't have a relationship with Venus, with the goddess, we miss all the subtle and sometimes overt ways that she touches our life, that she influences us and gives us little blessings and gifts and miracles. So those who do work with Venus during her heavy presence with the earth, when she's nearest to the earth, will reap the benefits in all areas of their life which she rules, which is love, lust, self-love, finances, abundance, confidence, creativity, and there's so many others. During my workshop where we worked with Venus throughout June, which is over now, but it went really, really well, and I'm very down to do new workshops that have to do with different archetypes. If you want to find out about those, sign up for my newsletter to be the first to hear about them. But that's over now. It was so fun. But I told the story of this myth. And when we work with astrology, we have to become familiar with myths and with symbolism, because that is the language of the stars. It's encompassed by all these different things, right? By astrology and by the mythos. They can't be separated. They make up this whole philosophy, this discipline, this learning, whatever you want to call it. So one of the myths about Venus, it tells the story about how Venus was so adored and beloved by the Roman people. Like, her festivals were the biggest in the land, festivals for Venus. Her temples were always taken care of. People would bring offerings, sacrifices, gifts. They would clean her temples, keep them shiny and beautiful and warm. Candles were lit, fire was lit. They were alive, right? One day, however, a human female stole the spotlight from Venus. So she was said to be so much more beautiful than the goddess that people started to worship her. And then Venus's temples began to decay. People stopped showing up, they stopped bringing offerings, and they stopped cleaning her temples. And they were in ruins. What I learned from this myth, which goes on to tell tales of jealousy, of revenge, and love, it's the symbolism of returning to Venus's temples during this time. We must tend to Venus's temples, either in our hearts, in our minds, and or physically by creating an altar or a space for her in our homes. But we also have to learn what exactly she's asking us to do. And what I believe she's asking that we return to her temples, but she also wants us to return to our own temples. And so the major theme of this retrograde for me has been returning to our own temples, our minds, our bodies, our souls. Making sure we're taking care of ourselves and not waiting on somebody else to be our caretaker, not waiting on that knight in shining armor, and instead becoming our own hero, becoming the caretaker of our temple, doing what needs to be done for our own well-being. And this, of course, is on a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual level. It's very, very easy to lose yourself to distractions during Venus retrograde in Gemini. I fell trapped to it many times myself, and I'm sure many of you out there can think of the times that you started to neglect yourself in the past few months. My recent video about coming back home to yourself was really just another layer, another symbolism to returning to your own temple. So taking care of yourself by prioritizing yourself and your needs, whatever that looks like. The second theme is that of reflection. When Venus retrograde occurs, Venus brings out a dusty old mirror and she holds it up to your face. A mirror symbolizes Venus as well, by the way. And when she does this, she's asking you to reflect on all the areas of your life which she rules, most commonly areas of like love and finances, and then she tests you, which is a gift. It's not a curse, it's a gift. She orchestrates something to happen so that you can ask yourself, is this what I want? Is this who I am? Have I changed? Is this actually what I still desire? So what happened in my own life, I think, is one of the most classic examples of Venus retrograde orchestrating things for me to reflect and to become more self-aware of what I want, what I don't want, and who I am now in this time on the planet. What she did for me was literally the day of her pre-shadow, I got in contact with an old high school crush. And, I had talked on and off with this person throughout my early 20s, and years ago we had given it a try, it didn't work out, and Venus brought him back into my life this time to ask me, is this still who you are? Or have you changed? Has he changed? Have you guys changed? Could it work now? Or is this just a way for you to see how different you are than you were even 3 years ago, or whatever it is? And throughout this retrograde process, I was able to have this understanding of this new situation in my life as being just a reflection for me. You may have noticed exes reaching out, past crushes reaching out, even past like old bosses or somebody that you work with or work for reaching back out to you. It could manifest in your own life in a limitless amount of ways. For each person, there is a unique prescription for exactly what we need. It's not going to look the same across the board. I think mine was pretty typical though. So I'd love for you to think about this and comment down below, what has Venus brought into your life during retrograde? And a great question to ask yourself is, what is the most interesting thing Venus brought to me? Because I'm sure she brought you a ton of things, but something will stick out where it's like, oh, that's really interesting. And what you have to understand is that it's not always bringing things. Sometimes Venus takes things out. She makes space in your life because she knows that you need that space and that you haven't shown that you're able to make that space yourself. So if something has been taken away from you, rather than looking at it as a curse or as like, oh, like, I can't believe this happened to me. Being grateful for it, saying thank you. Like, I know that this was meant to be, that this is part of my path, and that in the future I will understand why this was taken away from me. When you give that gratitude to Venus, she will grant you and gift you with what's going to replace that, with the greater thing that you're meant to have, and she will give you insight on why it was taken away from you eventually. So the last major theme is communication, and this plays out, as the others do, on a micro and a macro level. So I want you to consider what tough conversations you needed to have in your relationships in the past few months. So this could be in your family relationships, romantic, working space, friendly relationships, whatever it is, right? And this may have been exasperated when Mercury joined Venus. I don't remember what the actual date was, but when Mercury went retrograde, that, for me, that week was very exasperated for tough conversations. I just kept having to deal with thing after thing after thing, after years of really not speaking about how I feel about certain things and voicing those concerns to the people that I love, and the people that I love coming to me and voicing certain things. And each one of these conversations was difficult, but they also ended up with great resolution. So it was done for me. You may have noticed tough conversations in that way. This also reflects on the macro level, the theme that the US and many other countries around the world are experiencing, the uncomfortable and awkward conversation of race, which is meant to be uncomfortable. It's not meant to be a fun thing. We are having a conversation that beforehand was almost taboo to speak of. Now it's still awkward, but thanks to Venus and Gemini, we're finally having these conversations. So Venus in Gemini also points out the communication and information sharing that we're doing through social media and online, right? So everything to do with the current pandemic and racial issues of our time, that's all Venus in Gemini. That conversation, that sharing, that everybody's sharing all this information, all these things are coming to the surface. It's all part of the Great Awakening. It's all part of the process. It's the shadow work that we have to do, the initiation as a society, because who says that we were ready for ascension right away? We have to get through a lot of work before we're completely ready for this golden age, this peace and compassion and beauty that is coming to us. With this Gemini energy, many of us are just regurgitating information just to share, and most people, I would say, are doing this for very positive reasons, to show their allyship, to help others. Many people are doing things because they're confused, so sharing contradicting information when it comes to the pandemic and things like that. You know, we're all just sharing, and a lot of us aren't thinking before we share. So this is something that I had to learn during this time for sure. But that's really strong Gemini energy, sharing dualistic information through the interwebs. So with this theme, I think that it's very important to be discerning in what you share, delicate but truthful and honest. That is so important with how you voice your opinions. And when it comes to conversations with your loved ones, with your partner, with your crush, with your hookup buddy, with your boss, with whoever you need to have a conversation with, whoever it is, you're being called to be as vulnerable and as honest as you possibly can be. It won't feel good any other way. And I do believe that if you challenge yourself to be as honest as possible, it will eventually feel good, because you're just going to be like, I took the mask off, figuratively, right? I took the mask off. Like, I can just be myself and not worry about holding on to this story. I just said exactly how I feel, and give yourself permission to feel that way, to feel that freedom. So for me, the way that these themes worked out is through returning to myself, prioritizing taking care of my own temple, physically, emotionally, mentally, stepping back. I felt like I was almost forced to do things that I wasn't prepared for and I wasn't ready for. And I did my best, but I had to take a step back and I had to chill out and observe, right? So that will come towards the end. But returning to my temple and that Venus came to me, it was, okay, so creating an altar. I created an actual altar in my meditation space in my bedroom, where I have a picture of Venus and I have all these different things that are offerings to the goddess. So that created a connection with her, a stronger connection with her, showing her that I am open and willing to receive her guidance and her protection and her blessings, because she blesses us so much. You also create an altar in your heart. So this space in your heart that can never be destroyed, that can never be neglected. It's just this special space in your heart for that Venus energy. So that's in my heart for sure. returning to my temples was also about cleaning up the way that I was eating. I was doing a lot of emotional eating the past few months, as I'm sure a lot of you could relate to, with being at home a lot and so much stress and so much fear and shifting through all these different emotions. I just would reach for food, right? So I cleaned up my entire house. All I have is healthy food here. I'm grateful for that. And whenever I'm stress eating now, if I still do, I'm grabbing tangerines and bananas instead of chips or whatever it was at the time. So taking care of myself, going back to working out 3 times a week, 3-4 times a week, that was taking care of my temple, getting enough sleep, prioritizing my sleep. I have a video all about how I got back to myself. I'll link it below. So the reflection part, how it showed up to me, like I told you, I had many exes pop back in, asking to meet up, to talk. And I reflected on that and I realized, oh, well, they haven't changed, but I have drastically. And I'm glad that they've popped back up so that I could see that dissonance. They are not the vibration that I see myself in. Great people, all of them, but I've transcended the need to even have that energy in my life, right? So it was kind of a like, thank you, Venus, for bringing this. I'm going to say no, move past it, right? Thank you, Venus, for showing me that. The other reemergence is that crush went from when I was younger. Also able to see how deeply I've changed since he was last in my life, which was great. And how I really prefer myself now. I prefer where I am now than where I was before. I love that version of myself, the younger version of myself, but I prefer where I am right now. So often I find that these reemergences serve as distractions. And it's almost like this test to see if you'll stay on course, if you'll stay on track. I don't believe that the universe is sending you these tests. It is this archetypal Venus higher self energy. So it's really you testing yourself, right? And it's asking, will you stay on course? Will you stay on track? Or are you going to give it all up for something that a younger version of you actually wanted? And lastly, communication-wise, I had to have many difficult conversations. Conversations with my loved ones, conversations with my loved Black friends about current racial issues, and conversations with myself too. I had to reevaluate what I share online and how I share it and how I interact online and how much of myself I'm giving to this online world, right? And I've learned to slow down, to listen, to observe, and then react with my heart and heart rationality rather than from ego and from fear. So that is how Venus has affected my life. I'd love to know how Venus has shown up in your life. What is the most interesting thing she's brought to you? And in these 3 themes, which were, returning to her temples, reflecting, and communication, what changes have you seen in your life? I'd like to know all about that. It's so fascinating to me, and I know that it will be for everybody scrolling down through the comments too. So please share. And if you like this video and if you want more like it, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with other people because that helps the channel so much. And, we can create a bigger and bigger global community. I love you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you guys so much. I appreciate you. And until next time, keep your vibrations way, way, way up. Bye.